right. Well, hey, Rachel, welcome to This is 50 Freedom Through Passions. I'm excited to have you on the show today. I wanted to dive deep into this book that you're writing. I know you're going to talk a lot about that, how it's been a bit of a pivot from your leadership coaching. And I think that we can draw on a lot of your expertise from a leadership coaching perspective to helping women in midlife who might be a little bit stuck on figuring out what's next, maybe starting a business, maybe even writing a book of their own. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you. Give yourself a little bit of a backstory. Give us a little bit of a backstory on who Rachel is, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, well, thank you, Lynette. Who Rachel is? Well, right now I'm an executive coach and I'm a leadership development consultant. So I've been primarily working with leaders and organizations for quite a while now. My background originally is in psychology and in organization development. So I love to understand how people work inside out, individually, in groups. And that has really contributed a lot to the work that I do, which I love.
Yeah.
Now I'm pivoting a little bit, not pivoting to our conversation.
Yeah.
I still love working with leaders. I'm still absolutely going to do my coaching. And I've also written a book that is more about personal transformation. Not that leaders aren't people, they absolutely are. um, but
Sure.
more about personal transformation, which it really does feed into everything we do, but it's not specifically focused on leadership.
Right, right. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they think about, were you even telling your friends, hey, I'm going to write this book, the first thing they're going to think of is, oh, it's a leadership book. And then
Yeah.
they think, well, that's the last thing we need is another leadership book out there. So
No, they won't think that.
I'm joking. I'm joking. But no, on our pre-call, we got into your upcoming book, and I just thought, which wasn't really originally what we were going to talk about because your book isn't
Yeah,
quite published yet. It's
yeah,
on its way, and probably by the time that this podcast gets out there, it will be
yeah.
available. But we were talking a little bit about like how could you take your leadership coaching and really sort of draw on a couple of key things that, where I feel like a lot of women in midlife who want to do something different, like start a business or, even like you writing a book,
Yeah.
the first thing that I see and hear is this sort of level of stuckness, and that's like right on your speaker page of your website, and it's sort of like moving you away from this stuckness. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, where are you seeing? Why do people get stuck on wanting to do something different that specifically midlife women? I think, like, for me it's like, okay, midlife women, there's an event that's happened of some sort, right? Whether it was a death or a divorce or kids moving out of college, like early retirement or whatever, let go from their job, and they think, well, I'm not really quite done yet, and maybe it's my turn to do something for myself because I've been literally raising my family for the last 20,
Hmm.
25 years. So, but then they get into this, they get a little bit of momentum going, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, I can't do this. I'm stuck. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And first of all, just normalizing stuck, it is absolutely part of change. And just because you hit that stuck place does not mean you're doing something wrong. It just means you need to take a moment and figure out, how do I get unstuck?
Right.
So really, it's the topic of my book. It's almost the whole focus of my book.
Right.
And it's even funny. I have I have been trying to write a business book. I'm doing air quotes, or a leadership book, however you want to look at it, for a long time, and it just never felt right. And I finally, through a series of events, and in my book I like to call them clicks, like they open a lock through a series of events and doing things to move me towards writing a book. I opened up, kind of everything unlocked, eureka, it broke open, and I realized that wasn't the book I was supposed to write. When I realized the book I was supposed to write, it just poured out of me. I
Wow.
couldn't stop it. And when someone asked me, why are you writing this book? And I said, this book has been trying to write itself through me for a very long time.
Wow.
And I finally just gave up fighting it.
So, okay. So That is so interesting because I think for a lot of people, we get pushed into this sort of, well, you should do this. Obviously, it's
Yeah, yeah,
obvious you should be writing a leadership book. Like, clearly, you've been leadership coaching for the last 20 plus years. So, yeah, so that's where you were sort of thinking, okay, but then what was that feeling of when you realized, oh, God, this isn't the book I'm supposed to be reading. It's this book I'm supposed to be
yeah.
reading. What was that aha moment for you?
Well, and let me tell you a little bit of the backstory is that I feel like this entire book, which by the way is called Butterfly Goo, the
And I
down
want
and
to get
dirty
into that
truth of
name too. It's
transformation.
so good. It's so good. I love it.
So, for me, there's a lot of this. I found myself on different paths through life, a number of which I didn't consciously choose. Well, I chose them, but I didn't really think about why I was choosing them. And I would get to this place where I would just feel stuck. And for a long time, I allowed myself to make decisions based on fear and what I was afraid would happen if I pushed out of the box or what I was supposed to do.
Mm,
And through a series of events that I talk about in my book, I realized that this wasn't making me happy and this wasn't helping me be fulfilled. And I know a lot of times people think about, oh, everybody wants to be happy, and we can use whatever word we want, because some people say, well, it's not realistic to be happy all the time. All right, well, use the word content, use the word grounded. But whatever that is, living that true self, living who you are at your core. And I think a lot of times we find ourselves in these life stages, and even the stages that have been working for us throughout our life, and then we get to a new place and we're like, okay, this doesn't work anymore. This box that either I've put myself in or other people have put us in, it doesn't work anymore. And so how do I get out of this? How do I revisit who I am in this new phase of my life? And how do I find that? And the stuckness is absolutely a part of that. It's a part of it before we even start, and it's a part of it throughout our journey. And one of the things I think is so important, people, a lot of times when they feel stuck, they either feel like they're doing something wrong, they feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not capable of doing this thing that I want. I'm not smart enough, not good enough, just not enough. And so they step back into that comfort zone where, again, air quotes, where we're safe. The problem is safe and happy are not the same thing, and really safe is an illusion. We think if we play small, it will keep us safe, but the reality is there's no certainty, there's no
mhm,
predictability in what really life will hand you. And the best thing we can do is really kind of stretch ourselves, unfurl our wings, and start to believe that we can handle what comes at us. And really stepping into that allows us that no matter what change happens, we will be better prepared.
mhm. So when you were talking there, and I was just thinking, like, sometimes it's our subconscious mind that stops us and wants us to stay safe. So maybe it's a previous experience in your life that, okay, that didn't quite work. And so now your subconscious mind is potentially recognizing that as being a similar situation. And therefore, you end up not going down that direction because that one risk that you took before didn't work. In your leadership coaching, what do you see? Like, sure, there's like ways to deal with, like, there's that leadership styles and all that kind of stuff that you probably do, but the mindset side of it, that's what I really want to talk about today
Yeah.
is like getting into the mindset of trying to move beyond that little gremlin in your head that is saying, no, that's not the right thing to do. Really, you should just stay being a mom, even though your kids don't live with you anymore. But be a mom and hope that they call, and all that kind of stuff that happens when your kids move out. They just they stop calling. um, but so, but yeah, like, so what did you see, just even from a, because I think we take a lot from our day to day, our life in
Yeah.
general, our work, and it's very similar to our personal lives. And not to digress too much, but I do very similar things as you. I do more program management on the transformation side. And so what was that? That's like getting people to move through this change,
Yeah.
without the rose colored glasses and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things I realized is if they wanted to be part of this corporate culture and making this change that the corporation is doing, it almost had to align with their personal values as well. They had to kind of be thinking the same way and believe that way, kind of thing. So, what are some of the things that you see from a mindset perspective, and what was some of your advice that you would give to people around those particular things?
And I think to your point, and in an organizational level, there's so many facets of change. If we're going to focus more on the individual, something you said earlier about the gremlins, I think that
Hmm.
is so dead on. And we all have this, this little voice or the critic or, whatever the dialogue. And I say dialogue as opposed to
Hmm.
monologue because it is, we're having these conversations essentially with our gremlin and telling us that, well, you can't do that, or that's too risky. And in my experience, that voice is very old. Like it did
Hmm.
happen. It came from a place where maybe we were even kids or something happened. And the idea was that it was there to keep us safe. And the problem is that what kept us safe at one point now keeps us small, and it doesn't allow us to step into our full potential. I think one of the things that goes along with that, especially even I shouldn't say especially in leadership coaching, which I don't think people realize, they'll see it in their personal lives, but that imposter syndrome is huge. And a lot of times people think, oh, it's just me. I feel this way. I'm trying to hide that. You would be amazed at the level of that, in terms of title or where people have gotten in the organization, and they still feel it. And I think every time we step into the unknown, every time we make a big change, whether it's a promotion or there's some big change in an organization or it's something in our personal life, that imposter syndrome shows up. And it's, again, it's normal to be nervous. It's normal to be concerned. That imposter syndrome, when it becomes toxic, is when it actually inhibits us from taking action.
That's actually really interesting. I never actually thought of it that way. I thought just the whole thought of imposter syndrome was toxic, but I liked how you differentiated it. We're all going to be thinking it at some point. There's always going to be that level of imposter syndrome. We'll never overcome it. But when it becomes where it stops you from doing the things that you really want to do, inhibits you, it's the toxic part of it. So what do you tell somebody when that happens, when you can, like, where you've recognized that it was more than just imposter syndrome, it was the toxic part of it that was preventing them, or
Well, as a coach, and I know you do coaching as well, that it's less about telling people. It is about normalizing, which I think is really important, that helping people realize that whether it's imposter syndrome or stuckness or any of those things, this is normal. It's just part of the human experience. And I think there's a weight that's alleviated at some point with that and helps people then step into exploring what that is. And for everybody, it may be different. So, a big piece of coaching is really helping people explore what that imposter syndrome is, what the gremlins are, where is it impacting their life, what is it that they want to do about it. And then it's about experimenting. It's about going out in the world and showing up differently or doing different things and seeing what happens. And that can be scary, but I talk about it. It's like it's great in a coaching session. We can do a lot of really digging in and playing around with this, but then you have to take it out where the wild things are. You have to take it out into life. You have to actually put some of these into action. And the key is that a lot of times we think, okay, well, when I feel more confident, I will go do this. Well, yeah, that can work. But the tricky thing is that the gremlins don't tell you is that if I go out and do this, I will feel more confident. Yes. Will I fall? Will I fail? Yes. Will I triumph? Yes. But getting out and pushing out, our brains and our behavior work both ways. We will feel, when we feel more confident, we will do more things. The tricky thing we don't always realize is that when we go do more things and we succeed, we develop that confidence.
Yeah, for sure. More, you're right. Confidence just doesn't happen. It's accumulation of a bunch of steps taken towards something, and then you're more
Yeah.
confident about it. One thing when you were talking about the gremlin and kind of pushing through it and learning to recognize it, let's just use a real simple one. And it's something that I used to get a lot. But then I learned what you do, what you just said to do, recognize it and figure out what you're going to do about it. And that's the Sunday scaries. So Sunday, I mean, I think like, I don't think I've talked to anybody who's never had the Sunday scaries before. But what would you do? What would you say to somebody where they're constantly in this state of anxiety on a Sunday, whether it's because they maybe partied too much on the weekend or just simply that there's something going on at work that might not be feeling good and they can hardly wait till Friday and now it's Sunday again, meaning they got to go back to work tomorrow. Um, what would you say to somebody like just using that as an example?
Well, if you want to just kind of practice a little bit, I
Yeah,
mean, the
sure.
first question I would ask is, okay, well, tell me, first of all, tell me a little bit more about your Sunday scaries.
Right. I think it was just more like I don't know, maybe just I think one example I know a lot is I had so much on my plate I got to get done, and I didn't do anything on the weekend, and I probably should have. But now, oh my God, Monday's here, and now I got a million things to do, and so I think that's maybe where things are sort of drawing on that I started to get a little overwhelmed maybe with it.
Hmm. And so, and part of it, it also feels like it wasn't, you're telling yourself it wasn't okay for you to relax over the weekend, that it
Mhm.
wasn't okay for you to take the time off. And now you feel overwhelmed by what's coming at you.
Right. And I think like for me, what I did was I learned when that feeling was happening so that then I could like get on it right away. And I mean, literally, I would have a conversation with myself. I know it sounds a little
Yeah.
crazy, but I'd be like, no, you're not going there, Lynette. Do not think that. You're not going to do that. Don't do that. Just get going, and then make a list of things to do or
Yeah.
whatever, which I'm pretty diligent about on a Sunday. I'll kind of write out what my plan is for the week. But yeah, that was sort of this little ritual that I put into place.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess there's like a million other things that people think about when it comes to a gremlin. Um, but yeah, and to your point, just learning to recognize it.
Well, and I think what you did is a great example. We have these big things that can feel overwhelming, and we feel like we have to take all of it on all at once. And that can be paralyzing at times. It's
Hmm.
like, because you can't actually do it. And one of the exercises I offer in the book is really thinking about, how do I break this down? How do I
Right.
chunk this off?
Yeah.
And when we start to do that, well, a couple of things. One, chunking it down starts to really help us see, okay, what are the steps? What are the actual achievable pieces that I can do? And there's a number of books that talk about this far better than I do in terms of habit and all of that. And one of the things early, when we have our most mental energy, or a lot of us do, some people are night owls, we have the most kind of energy in order to make decisions in the morning. I often encourage people, start with the thing you want to do least,
Hmm.
or start with the biggest thing that's scary. When you have the most energy, when you have the most focus, do that. And even that little win can help energize us. It can unlock a lot of that, because getting started is often the hardest part. It's that, the journey of a thousand
Hmm.
miles begins with a single step. And every journey is that way. That, one of the things I really like to say, and I say it in the book, is you have to start your journey from where you are. You can
Yeah,
wish
that's
you'd done
really
all
good.
these other things over the weekend, but two things. One, giving yourself permission to relax. And then, instead of focusing on, oh, I should have done all this, that should, which is a waste
Hmm.
of energy because you can't change
Right.
the past anyway. what can I do now? What's the one thing I want to take? How do I start from where I am today?
Right. So, Rachel, let's go to the day where you realized you had your aha moment of, oh God, this isn't the book I'm supposed to be writing. I'm supposed to be writing this other book. Like, how did you know that you were supposed to be writing Butterfly Goo? And I want you to get a little bit, explain what Butterfly Goo really means, how did you come up with the name of it? But yeah, like just that day where you realized, what am I doing? I'm writing the wrong book.
Yeah. Well, it was pretty clear I was writing the wrong book for a while. Um,
You just couldn't get momentum, or?
yeah, I mean, there's feeling stuck and knowing that it's something you want to do, but you feel stuck by fear. There's feeling stuck because you're hitting up against a wall that you're trying to push yourself through, but you don't necessarily want to push yourself through. So there are different, on the outside or even to us, it may seem similar, but it's really important to get underneath why we feel stuck, because then we either know, all right, here's what we need to do because this is something that's very important to us and we're passionate about. And how do I get there versus, I'm hitting my head against a wall and this isn't really where I'm supposed to go. And how do I pivot? How do I figure out where that real path is?
Mhm.
And one of the things I talk about in the book, and a lot of what I talk about in the book, I talk about it because this was my experience. This is what I went through. We talk about that epiphany moment. We talk about that eureka moment.
Right.
And the reality is, and I use the analogy of a combination lock, that there are all these little clicks that happen to open the lock. Without those clicks, the lock doesn't spring open. And we get enamored by this idea of the eureka moment. And we think it's magic and we think it's this, wonderful aha that came out of nowhere. And that is such a self-defeating narrative because if we believe it's magic, if we believe it comes out of nowhere, then we're just waiting for magic to happen.
Yeah, that's really, really, really good because that's what I'm trying to get from you. I'm trying to get what was that eureka moment? And
Yeah. How do I
yeah,
recreate the eureka? Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So, okay. Sorry. Keep going. Sorry. But I just, that's really
Oh, no,
interesting
no.
because
Yeah.
I was like really probing for that moment,
Yeah.
but I think I know where you're going to go with this now. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was that stuck and then feeling like going back to when we make decisions and we do something different. I always say, if you want a different life, we have to live a different life.
yeah,
So when we make those decisions, when we take those little steps that may seem small in the moment and maybe they are, but they start to build. Those are the clicks in our lock. And initially we may not hear them as clicks, but we get to a point where you do that enough, you can start to hear the clicks. You can even start to feel the tumblers move before
hmm,
you hear the clicks. That is going to lead you to change. And I think one of the things that's so important is people look at the eureka moment as the transformation. It's not. It's just the indication that the lock has finally sprung open. The transformation is all of those little things that you did coming up
the
to it. It's
clicks,
kind of
all the
the
little clicks.
clicks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the example from the butterfly is the butterfly hasn't transformed because it emerges from the cocoon. It emerges
Right.
from the cocoon when it has transformed. And so getting away from, how do I create a eureka moment versus how do I start to do something different, live differently to achieve something different? And
Right.
it's all those little things. So how did I get there? I did workshops. I hired a coach myself. I read. I did podcasts. I listened to podcasts. I wrote. I stopped writing, which kind of a chunk as opposed to a click, as I say. Um, and then magically the lock sprung open. And so it's really important to get away from that idea that there is this magic that happens in that eureka moment, as opposed to looking at it as this journey that you've taken to get you to that destination.
I love that. I love that. And, in some of my other podcasts, I've talked about, sort of that whole concept of just, you may, for years, I used to always focus on the end of the, like looking and can I see where I'm going? Perfect. That's where I'm going. And I get on the path and go. But that wasn't the right thing. The right thing is to enjoy what's happening on the path there, knowing full well that stuff just starts to show up and stuff doesn't show up for you if it's
Yeah.
not meant to be as well. So, okay, so talk a little bit about the butterfly goo, like the whole concept behind the goo, I guess.
Well, I've really always resonated with the idea of the butterfly. And in the book, I call it a cocoon. Really, butterflies come out of a chrysalis, but the
Yeah,
analogy and moths come out of a cocoon, which
yeah,
you'll hear me say my entomologist brother insists that moths are much cooler than butterflies. But the analogy that seems to work for folks, because we work on analogies, is the butterfly idea in the cocoon. So I
yeah.
apologize to all the entomologists out there that it's not 100% accurate, but we all get it.
I think we
Um,
relate to the cocoon.
we do, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And plus, it makes a really nice verb, cocooning.
yeah.
We have this idea of it, right? And um, you know, when you think about the butterfly, it's this beautiful thing, right? We really admire that. We don't appreciate what the caterpillar actually has to go through to get to be the butterfly. And one of the things I talk about is, after the caterpillar goes to all that trouble to spin, kind of to create this cocoon or this chrysalis for itself, essentially in that chrysalis, in the cocoon, it dissolves into this goo-like substance. It has completely kind of disassembled itself. And yet it brings with it the core of who it is, of what it is. And from that core, it creates something new. It doesn't create something new out of nothing. It creates itself, and it has to go through that goo. It has to go through that transformation in order to come out the other side a butterfly.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I say in my book is that with butterflies, one of the reasons I like it is because the beauty distracts us from how arduous the transformation process is. And that's
Mhm.
part of what feeds into that illusion, delusion, however you want to talk about it. And I think if we really appreciated the goo that the butterfly has to go through, then we wouldn't expect to be born butterflies.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I like what you were saying is that it's already in them,
Mm-hmm.
but they just had to rid themselves of the other things that they don't need. And I think if you use that, you use that as the analogy for transformation, it's the beautiful thing at the end, but
Yeah.
sometimes it gets a little messy as you're transforming too. One thing I had for you was so I have an online program that helps women come up with, take their idea for a business and get just to their first client, which, typically is just a minimal viable product, which I always find is a little easier because then you can just get going. And as you say, it grows. The more clicks you keep going and the more clicks you collect, the better it is. But it was interesting. This last cohort that I had, it just intuitively, it was a Friday. We meet every Friday, and intuitively, I just went, you know what? We're gonna not talk about what I thought we are gonna talk about today, but instead, I'm just gonna ask every one of you to tell me how you're feeling at this stage. So it was about I'm going to say it was about a quarter of a way through. We were almost halfway through sort of getting that minimal viable product out there. They clearly knew who their target avatar was, or was going to be. But it was interesting. Every single one of them said this feeling of overwhelm, of procrastination, imposter syndrome, and even sometimes towards the end, when so we had this conversation and then we kept going, and I made sure we had conversations about that every time moving forward. But even at the end, one of my students said to me, Lynette, if you would not have come out to the event, it was going to be her first launch event, I would have never launched this thing. And I was like, wow, why did we get like that? We know it's going to work. We've got people who are going to come to the event, but if I didn't show up, like she would have crumbled under this, possibly crumbled under this belief of self-worth that she was good enough to do something like this, even though we all sort of like, wow, I wish we could be like you and what you do, and now you're going to teach us how to do it. It's just really interesting. Why do you think we get those stages along the journey?
Well, and I do think they are stages. One of the reasons I think that, what she said, maybe this is true, especially in the US or in the West, I don't know, but we have this idea somehow that we have to achieve things all on our own.
Right.
And it is such, again, it's a myth. We live in all these myths. I always like to talk about building your village. And
Mhm.
we build that support structure, even as a group, being able to talk about the fact that they all felt that way. Again, I go back to it normalizes it. This is normal. And having a village, having those people to support you is also normal. This idea that asking for help is a weakness is still there. And yet we talk all the time about the fact that asking for help is actually a strength and it's something we need. But deep down, I don't know that we let go of that very easily, that we think we're
I
supposed to do
agree.
this all on our own. And I think that's one of the things that was showing up for her in terms of, I don't know if I could have done this without you. And the other piece that I talk about in the book is, whether we're looking at someone else from the outside and versus what we feel on our inside, we have 24/7 access to this gremlin or the kind of our own thoughts and feelings about things. But on the outside, we only see parts of people and we specifically see the parts that they want us to see. We talk about, especially on social media now, but this idea of a curated life. And so you don't know what's going on under that armor. I talk a lot about
Mhm.
armor. And one of the things I say is, people look all shiny from the outside, that shining, that shimmer, that perfect looking life. And sometimes that shimmer, they may be happy, they may be super successful, and that's great. And some of that shimmer may just be the light bouncing off their armor.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. What about when it comes to like, I think it goes back. I'm thinking about it because of what you said about the first attempt at writing a book was this leadership
Yeah.
book, and you were just getting stuck along the way and realized, okay, this isn't really what I'm supposed to be writing about.
Yep.
Um, but it's kind of like, what happens when you kind of get down that path, and maybe there are days where you don't feel like working on that thing anymore,
Yeah.
or there's weeks where you don't want to work on that anymore,
Yeah.
or you're now this VP at so and so company, and and you're like, oh, this isn't really what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
What do you do in that case where you learn to recognize that? Like, is that the beginning of this cocoon chrysalis stage that you're talking about in butterfly goo?
I think it absolutely can be, and it kind of depends on what you do with that. I talk about the red flags, the signs that we often ignore. That we're
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, yeah, well, maybe I don't want to do this, or maybe this really isn't for me. And it's like, yeah, yeah, but I've been on this path for a long time. I've committed to this, and I just need to push through this. I need to do more of what I already don't like, and so that
Right.
I can push through it and get there. And I think that's a piece that we first have to just acknowledge that, there is possibly something different. And I think then it's about exploring. And first of all, by the way, giving yourself some grace that
Mhm.
your day is not always going to be 24/7 productive. You're going to have days. I have days where like a Saturday hits. I'm like, you know what? No, I think I'm just going to watch movies all day. And,
Yeah.
it's really
Netflix.
unproductive, right? Unproductive. But it is
Yeah.
also space.
Hmm.
And then the other thing is, okay, how do I get out of what I normally do? Because where I normally am, say, if I'm a VP in a company or I'm in a particular stage, I am surrounded by the same kinds of things, the same ideas, the same triggers, all of the stuff that is helping to keep me the same. How do I take myself out of that environment and start to maybe react and respond to things differently. Now, I always say, and I realize this is not an option for everybody, but my husband is French. And whenever we go visit my in laws in France, my brain just works differently. I mean, part of it, it has to, because I have to speak French, which
Yeah.
is debatable on how well
Yeah.
I do that. But it opens my brain up. But you don't have to get on a plane and go somewhere. You could just go sit in a park. You could go to a local museum. You could go spend time with people who feed you in different ways. The important thing is, don't think that just staying in the same environment, the same things, is going to bring about different ideas. Think about innovation of your life and how innovation and creativity work in our business. It works for us the same way. And I really think it's important for us to, we talk about stepping outside our comfort zone like it's this leap. And sometimes it is. And sometimes it really is just walking down and going to the park when we feel like we should be working, because we don't think that's productive. But it is, because creativity is not like a linear kind of thing. It's not something where we can put down, kind of, okay, we're going to do this today and this today
Yeah.
and this today.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can plant seeds,
Hmm.
absolutely. But the idea of taking time out, our brain gets to kind of chew on things that are kind of back in the back, but we're not giving it space. It's that whole idea of like, why do we get some of our best ideas in the shower? And it's
Hmm.
because we've let go of trying to force something and allowing things to manifest in our brains that are already there, but maybe they just don't have access to kind of that, the conscious brain.
Yeah.
And opening it up, it kind of, it allows them, the ideas
Yeah.
or that part of our brain to really step forward. So
Exactly.
giving yourself that space and opportunity is huge in trying to figure out, what is it you really do want? What direction do you want to go? What are the ideas you want to explore? Give yourself space.
I love that. And there's a couple other things I want to talk to you about. One is, so I'm in a new chapter now, right? I'm in my midlife. My kids are gone off to college. I'm gonna probably not. I'm not a golfer. I'm not like so. I can't see myself ever not working. So now I'm sort of, well, I like this. I like this. And I'm doing things, but not everything has to be. I'm what I'm getting at is I think a lot of women in midlife start to think, okay, well, I want to start doing something with much more purpose and passion.
Hmm.
Freedom through passions is the
Right.
tagline for this podcast. But not everything, I guess, has to be. I think it's kind of what you were saying. This happy place every single day, and
No.
you may be living your purpose, but it's some days you just not feeling like living the purpose. And
Yeah.
I'm going to just binge watch the latest thing on Netflix or Apple TV or whatever, Spotify
Yep.
podcast, whatever, YouTube. But yeah, so I guess, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that. We should be really looking at that as like, okay, well, maybe it's just your body saying, take a break and take a reset. Maybe, like you said, just go for a walk, because maybe there's something you're doing that doesn't feel right, but it's not everything, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's interesting. It goes back to the same behavior can mean different things. Having that day to just relax and decompress and all of that
Hmm.
can be so important. On the other hand, and I admit, and part of my whole book is being vulnerable and being clear about my own journey. And you have moments where endless streaming becomes an escapist coma. So it's like I'm just trying to avoid life as opposed to I'm relaxing from life in order to energize myself. And otherwise, I'm just trying to avoid it. And
Okay,
I
that's
think
good.
one of the challenges, as you were talking, I think that really is important is that when we step out of one phase or what we want to do, a lot of times we look around and say, okay, well, what are the boxes available to me?
Hmm.
I know this is an option. I know that's an option. And our brains are so wired for boxes because it's easy, right? It's like we put something in these discrete segments and say, well, okay, this is this. Good. All done. I can walk away. The reality is, First, life exists on a continuum, or continua, actually, multiples, but that's more complex and rightly so. And the reality is, at least for me, I don't fit very well in boxes. I
Hmm.
never have. And I spent a lot of time trying to fit myself in other people's boxes, trying to fit myself into a cookie cutter. And even writing this book, I talk all the time about don't try to push yourself in a box that's not yours. And yet, even when I got to this book, I was doing it again. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I realized I was doing it. I thought, okay, I'm supposed to write a business book, or I'm supposed to write a leadership book, or maybe even a self help book, boxes that are already existing in the world. Great. And then I realized, but none of that fits. And instead of being frustrated that I can't fit myself in a box, it's like, okay, stepping back. It's like, okay, what is this organically? What is it that you want to do? I always kind of say, and I'm not sure I can say the word hell, but I always say,
Yeah.
people are always going to try to put you in boxes. Maybe you're even going to try to put yourself in a box, but people will always try to put you in boxes. But hell if I'm going to make it easy for them. And
Right.
why should I make it any easier for myself to try to put myself in a box? Then I should try to make it easier for others. So letting go of those boxes, first of all, and knowing that that is not all that's possible is hugely liberating, very empowering, and terrifying all at the
Yeah.
same
No,
time.
I love that. I think about that and the stereotypical life that in our age genre, maybe not so much our kids' genre now, but the stereotypical lifestyle, right? Of just, you went to school, you got married, you raised your family, you did those things, you were the good wife, you were a good partner, you were the good whatever. And, I think I crammed myself so many times, a square peg into a round hole, so many times because I thought that was the life I was supposed to live. And I think this sort of life of conformity really sort of sometimes backfired on me because I would lose it sometimes, like not lose it but I would just be like, oh, I can't, what am I doing? And it's this conformity. And I just don't think that we should be conforming to the things that we don't believe in our values. And I think that's why it's important to just even understand your values and what do you stand
Oh
for
yeah.
and what is it that you want to do. Really interesting. What aha moments did you have when you were writing your book? Like you realized, we know there wasn't a real true eureka moment of like, okay, I'm now going to write this book. That was cleared up earlier, but you had to have realized something about yourself through the journey a little bit. And I'm going to pause you at
Okay.
42:15, and I'm going to move you a little bit more on center.
Okay. Yeah.
Rachel,
So we
just
have like that.
actually it's
That's
the
fine.
other way. Yeah,
There we go.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Perfect. Okay.
42:15 to 4:28. Okay, perfect.
All right. So say what you just said
The
again.
boxes, they like,
Yeah.
no, pardon me, the aha moment. So
Aha
we
moment.
know we know you didn't have a eureka moment during like, okay, now I'm like, okay, I've got this all figured out now. This is the book I'm going to write, and it practically wrote itself, which we know is now not the truth, but I was hoping it
Well,
was.
yeah, let's so let me pause on that because
Yeah.
I absolutely did have eureka moments. What I'm
Okay,
saying
good.
is that they build from other things. So it's important to not expect them to come out of the blue, but yeah, do they absolutely feel really good? Is there
Yeah.
this aha that is like, oh, I'm supposed to do something different? It was just that there were a lot of little clicks that lead up to that. And when that aha moment happened, I remember I was sitting, I was in France. A lot of this seems to happen in France. Doesn't have to
Okay.
again.
There we go.
But you're out of your element, you're out of your regular routine. And I had been working with a coach trying to get myself unstuck in this particular area as well. And I was listening to a podcast, and I don't even remember exactly what it was about, but it was about meditation or something about looking, seeking yourself, all of that. And again, it's not that you can take any one of those things and say, okay, well, that's what it's going to take to launch me into the aha. But whatever happened, the aha finally opened, the last click, fell into place. And I started writing. I didn't
Wow.
know what I was going to write. I didn't know where I was going with this. And it's so funny because I took even afterwards, I took some more classes or did some more online things. I'm like, well, you sit down with this book and you write out first, you write out your outline. And that didn't happen. It was more like I
I've
was
heard
doing
that
it as I
before,
go.
actually.
Yeah. I mean,
I've
it's
heard
great
write
if
the
it works for
outline on
you.
the first chapter and send it to the editor and get their thoughts, you know?
No, yeah, no, that is not how it happened. It was
That's not how
so
it clicks.
organic. No, and that's okay. And again, kind of the other direction, if you are an outline person and that really works to organize your brain, then great, do that.
Yeah.
But to your point, you were saying I should, I should. When you start hearing that I should all the time, that's a red flag. And
Okay.
step back and say, okay, what is it? First of all, why is it I think I should do something? And why do I keep trying to push me into the should? And instead, how do I step back and think, okay, based on my values and what I want, what is it I want to do? What is it I feel compelled or passionate to do? And these sound like easy either ors, and it's not. But when we continuously tell ourselves we should do something, it's a red flag. And I'm not saying that we always have to, go the opposite direction or take some thing that we're passionate about or we're loving and we just have to completely follow that down a path either. What I'm saying is when you hear the red flags, it's a good time to stop. Your gut is trying to tell you something and your gut may not be right, but it's worth a conversation. So
Yeah, like a reflection point at some point, like it's
yes,
to pop up a
yeah.
little bit because sometimes I think we can ignore those red flags.
Oh, we do,
Oh
or we even push them
God.
down. We do. No, no,
Exactly.
no. I la
Exactly.
la 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 la.
No, 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 no.
I
I've
want it.
already
La
written
la
two
la la.
chapters. Forget it. I've
No,
already got 10,000 words. Forget it.
that's right. And I think, I had no idea where it was going to go. And I think for me, that was really important. That was part of letting go of the gremlins. That was part of listening to other people's advice or what they think. And I'm
Oh,
not saying there
right.
aren't people out there that can help you. And yet when people tell you you should do something or they say, you shouldn't do something or you have to, that's based on their experiences and their path, not
True.
yours. You have to figure out what works for you. Like you were saying before, you have to let go of some things, you have to keep some things, and you have to pick up some things that are new because
Right.
you're out there building your path. And that is one of the things I talk about throughout the book is people talk about finding my path. You're not finding anything. In fact, Joseph Campbell, who I reference a lot, says if you find a path that's already there, it's not yours. You have to
Wow.
build your path. And I
Yeah.
think that, again, very empowering, very scary, all good. Those two things often go together. But we have this idea that, again, magic, that the path is just going to show up, that if we sit here and wait, it'll just come to us. And I'm not saying
Right.
there aren't some of those aha moments along the path, but we build it. We build our
Yeah.
path because then it's ours.
I love that. And when when you were saying that, it just reminded me of like even some of the things that I'm doing in my business, like starting a podcast or doing this online program where it's from idea to first client. Well, there's got to be a million other people who have paved that path. And if I was to follow those people, it would just be the same. Like, it would just be like a version of what they're doing. And so I I like that where take learning, like you said, you listened to podcasts, you read books, you kind of did some initial writing, you hired a coach, things like that, but yet it was you. And that's the one thing that we realize is that my program sure might be similar to other people's in price and kind of framework, if you will, but it's me teaching it, it's
Yeah.
me and my ideas, my thoughts. And you know one other thing you were saying too, the shoulds, right? If people should, I
Mm.
am famous for saying that as a mother. Like I'm constantly telling, like, well, even I get such pushback too, like, mom, you always say should, like, Alyssa, I just want to figure this out on my own. But it's just like, oh, I know, but I know what you need to be doing. But yeah, you're teaching me something there. I might be a red flag for my kids at some point.
It's
So at
funny.
the Yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say one
go
of the
for it.
quotes that comes to me always, and kind of the Wizard of Oz, so many things to learn from that in terms of, the hero's journey, as
Yeah,
Campbell would call it. And at the end, Glinda tells Dorothy that she always had the power to go home. She was wearing the red, slippers the whole time, and you always had the power, to go back to Kansas. And the Scarecrow says, well, if she did, like, why didn't you tell her that sooner? And she said, because she wouldn't have believed me. She had to figure it out
Right.
on her own.
Yeah.
And that's what your kids are asking. That's what we
Yeah,
all
I
have to
know.
do.
I know. I for sure am a self-proclaimed enabler. I know that, and I tell people that. Like, I know that now. I just don't want them to have the life I did. But I think that's kind of why I am where I am, because I did have to do it myself. So anyway,
Hmm.
I think we can damage. So okay, so you've got the book, and we won't go through the process of going back and forth with the editor and getting your first copy back, possibly redlined like crazy. But what did it feel like? I think like I think there's a story in everybody. I think that, to you, you call your Butterfly Goo a bit of a memoir. And I love that. And I've interviewed a couple of other people just of late that have written memoirs. And I love that word. I think it's just, I think writing the book, it makes me feel like you gave yourself a ton of grace. You said you were vulnerable throughout it, and
Yep.
it just gives you a good feeling. What would you tell somebody in midlife, a woman like who's listening and thinking, you know what, maybe I do have a story in myself. What would you say to them? Because I think, in our 50s and beyond, we can tend to lose a lot of confidence. We've talked about this earlier about imposter syndrome, but I think imposter syndrome happens at any age. But I think
Hmm.
especially in your 50s, where you're not as seen as you used to be, and you can start to lose a bit of confidence on a number of fronts. So I think that can inhibit um, your ability to kind of try to do something new.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially if you have that mindset, or if we're in transition, that's one of the most difficult times, to really step in, because we don't necessarily know where we're going. If if I were going to, well, first of all, as a coach, I don't spend a lot of time giving advice. I
Right.
spend a lot of time
You pull it.
listening,
Yeah.
and pull it, because I think too often, I've had clients that'll say, "Well, just tell me what to do," and my answer is no.
Yes. No, I want you to tell
No,
me.
I'm not going to tell you. And it's like, again, people are kind of looking for that magic, that somehow out there is the answer. And really, it's about, first of all, you do have a story. You were saying, well, there's other people who've done this before. Well, sure, but they haven't done it from your perspective. They haven't done
Right.
it with your voice. And the reality is, different people, different journeys, different experiences resonate differently with different people. There are folks out there that are going to connect with us that maybe aren't going to connect to the other people doing it. And there are people that are connecting with the other person that they're not going to connect with us. And that's
Yeah.
fine. The other thing is, how do you want to express your story? Because we kind of get this idea of a book, and books are great, and absolutely they're a great vehicle for your story. They're not the only vehicle for your story. You do have podcasts, you have mentoring, you have volunteering, you have starting a new business. Your voice is not limited, and your story is not limited to the pages of a book. So, first
Mhm.
of all, that's a bucket, and it's a
Yeah.
great kind of area to
Yeah, it's good.
explore, right? But start first with, who are you? What's important to you? Your values. Who are you at your core? It's kind of like taking, you see something you want to build, and you start building it, like, because I have a hammer, therefore I build this. It's that whole adage of, like, well, it's kind of the hammer or the screwdriver thing. It's like, don't start with what, kind of like, okay, I could write a book, or I could do this. Step back, and what's the vision? What is it you want? And you know what? The other thing is, like any journey, it is great to have a vision. Set that up. That can be inspiring for you, and hold it loosely, because
Mhm.
as you go through, it will change. Maybe not. There are some people that They have a very direct path. That was not my path.
Yeah,
It
no,
was very
me neither.
circuitous. It was loop to loop. It was all of this back.
That
So you
hero's
can
journey
that
took a
here
lot
it
of
was just this like
detours.
screwy. Oh yeah, it's more of a loop to loop than it was
Yeah,
any kind of
yeah,
straight
yeah,
linear experience.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So I would say step back. Don't start with the solution when you don't really even know the driver. You don't know the driver. You don't know. It doesn't have to be an underlying problem. It has to be some kind of, there's a need, there's some desire to express something. So start with that rather than
Mhm.
starting to already try to push yourself into some kind of box because you don't even know where you're going yet or what you want.
Yeah, start dabbling a little bit, maybe write a little bit of a blog.
Sure.
And it does remind me of a woman I just interviewed who wrote a book, but it all started, the catalyst was that she went on this trip for 20 days and wrote emails every day to people that were quite lengthy emails. But she said
Yeah.
that became the catalyst for this book. And like, how did she know that? Like, she wasn't
Yeah.
an author before, sort of thing.
Nope.
So, yeah, no, that's really good advice. All right. So, one last thought. How does it feel? You know you're going to be published January
Mid
2025.
yeah, mid January.
Okay.
Yep.
Tell us, give us the feeling.
Ah, well, it's funny because you get to certain points and you're right. You feel scared. You feel like, oh, can I really do this? And that's normal. And going back, I think one thing to know about that in your journey, when you're pushing outside, it is not about eliminating that feeling. You will never eliminate that feeling. It's about how do you tolerate it? How do you embrace it? And then how do you move beyond it? And kind of that idea of, I talk about it a little bit with my gremlins. It's like before you listen to them, now you're like, yeah, yeah, I got this. I'm going forward.
Yeah.
And so at some point for me, it transitioned where it took on a life of its own. I think part of that was building the village. It was getting an editor, getting someone to help you design the cover, having someone help you think about the launch, all of these things, having someone help you that, you can work with to get you on podcasts and talk to
Yeah.
fabulous people like you.
Yeah.
It takes on a life and a momentum of its own, and it almost starts to move forward on its own without you. And
Wow.
that's where I am.
Amazing.
The woman who's helping me design the book, the cover said, well, at the beginning, 0 to 100%, how sure are you that you want to publish this book? And I said, oh, 100%. I said, the train has left the station at this point. I don't think I could stop it if I wanted to. So, and I don't want to, but there is no like hesitation at this point. And I love getting to that point. And it doesn't going back. I may be at the butterfly stage or very close to breaking through that final cocoon,
Yeah.
and it does not take anything away from the goo and the mess that I had to go through to get here. In fact, that is what has made me who I am. That it's those
Yeah.
experiences that gave me this story to share. So,
I love that. Well, I feel like
yeah.
that's already a part two, like book number two. Like, hey, like the goo never goes away.
The goo never
Well,
goes away.
exactly. Well, okay, so January 2025 is when the book is ready to launch. I'd love to have you
Yep.
back after I've read it because I will track it down somehow wherever
Would
I'm
love it.
living. And yeah, I'd love to have you back and just talk a little bit more about it and dig deeper into it because I mean, it's such a great, it was a great idea for a book, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. So, Rachel,
Thank you.
where can people find you?
The best places to find me at this point, I don't have the book website up yet,
Yeah.
still in process
Yeah.
also. I have my work website, which is Catamentum, Catamentum, which back to your word, catalyst, is
Yeah.
catalyze momentum, kind of smushed
Okay.
together. So
Yeah.
I love the word catalyst.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. So Rachel Burr.
Perfect.
I don't know that there's a lot of me's kind of out there. So, or Rachel M. Burr is Rachel Maureen Burr. You can find that. So I think those are probably two of the best ways to start
Sounds good.
and
Well,
go
I'll
from
put
there.
some links in the show notes anyway, so
Great.
it'll be there. And yeah, and just right probably when this podcast is publishing, your book will be launching, so it'll be perfect timing.
Excellent.
So, well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me. You're a wonderful person to talk to. I really enjoyed our conversation. Super smart, endearing. I felt you. It was great. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. I really appreciate you having me on today.
My pleasure.